to Business Succession Planning 101. This is episode 4 out of 5. I am Gary Winter. I'm the managing attorney at Lawvex. We are Central California trust and estates law firm. I've been doing estate planning and business succession planning, business planning for 19 years, and just going through a kind of a personal journey over the last couple years as I began to do business succession planning for myself and decided to kind of share the journey along the way. So, thanks for checking us out and joining us. Some of you, I think, know me, and we have prior working relationship and are connected on LinkedIn. Those of you who don't, uh, nice to meet you, and thanks for joining the stream. But um, I'll get right into it. So, first of all, today is about transferring your business to your family or to a child. Um, as I shared, this is the fourth episode out of 5, and we may do some more. I think we'd like to, but the concept here is to get some information out there and education because um, I really love to teach, and I think that ultimately education is probably the best way to leave a legacy is to leave the world a little better place by sharing information with others and kind of not just what I've learned in the past, but what I am learning. And stuff like this is not really an overly formal talk, not overly legal, just kind of documenting my personal journey as I shared and um, kind of what I've experienced by providing this kind of legal counsel to others. So yeah, so if you haven't seen the previous ones, the first one I just kind of gave an overview, told a little bit about my story and why business succession planning is important to me. And maybe some of that resonates with you. But the second episode was dealing with incapacity of a owner or operator, and we talked about powers of attorney and living trusts and definitions of an emergency and having an emergency policy on hand for your team. And then the third episode was how to deal with death of an owner and operator. Again, having a living trust in place and having business succession nominations for people to take over in the event that you can't, especially for those of us who are licensed professionals where you have to have a licensed attorney or a licensed CPA or a licensed doctor to be able to run the corporation in the event that you can't. So, sort of setting up those things ahead of time and the practical aspects of all that goes along with that. Um, but today, what we're trying to cover in this session is identifying some options for transferring business to family members. This is a hot topic. Everybody is interested in this. I don't see a lot of people talking about it. I don't know if that's because it's controversial or it's just, it's a hard discussion to have with business owners because we all have, if you're a parent like I am, we all have these kids. Some of these kids would be great in business. Some of them are not. Some of them want to do completely different things. Some of them are just not in a position in life, let's say, to even think about running a business, right? And then you've got others that just dive in and really work the business. And so we're going to unpack that a little bit today and learn something about it. I'll share a little bit of my experience and kind of my thoughts on it, but there obviously are practical implications for just as a parent and a family member having other kids. There's financial implications and legal as well. So ideally, I would love for you to develop a strategy that preserves both your family harmony and preserves business continuity. Right? I think that's all of our goal is like how do we sort of pass this thing on in such a way that um, it can continue the work that we started. So all right. So without further ado, one introduction. I want to introduce Macy Lemos. She's our marketing coordinator and runs all of our in-person and web-based events. She is online with us hosting here, so thank you, Macy. And you can reach Macy just Macy at Lawvex Lawvex.com. And the reason you might want to reach out to her is she's our marketing coordinator and she coordinates our Team 100 referral network. And so if you're interested in checking that out, email Macy, do a Team 100 referral call with her, learn a little bit about what it's all about. And she also has the today's risk assessment checklist. So for each one of these episodes, there's a separate risk assessment checklist. Um, and you can follow along with me as we go through this. And Macy, why don't you go ahead and put that up, and I'll share my screen with the risk assessment checklist. And then you can message her in the chat or send an email to her, and she can share that with you as well. So starting off, let's go right into this. Family readiness, business viability. Um, First of all, is your son or daughter even appropriate to run a business? I mean, I think the threshold question is determining their level of interest and commitment. Some of that's very obvious for certain kids, and some of it's not. Uh, if it's not obvious to you, you really need to think about whether they've got the necessary skills, leadership qualities, and the vision to successfully run your company. Um, there, there are always other options, right? Like you don't have to transfer ownership to your kids. You can hire outside management. You can, sell it on the open market, which is actually the subject of our next episode and our fifth episode coming up. I'm going to talk about how to prepare your business to sell, to list and sell on the open market, whether it's private sale or public sale. So there are other alternatives. You don't have to give it to your kids. Uh, it's your estate. You're not obligated to do it. However, if we do decide that our one or more of our kids are in a position to do this and we think that it's the best thing, then having some kind of a plan to do this is key, right? So that's going to be in a practical level, like um, maybe a mentorship period where they're working closely with you to gradually transition responsibilities. Um, Candid, honest feedback, right? It doesn't do anyone any good to put a kid in charge of a business and then have them run the ship aground, right? So uh, really kind of having a period of time where they can prove themselves and learn um, is critical. And then on the business side, just taking a look at the valuation of the business. What is the business worth in terms of current market value? Being aware of what our financial health is, cash flow, tax returns, and also if there's any uh, potential risk areas that could impact that transfer, like outstanding debts, pending litigation, or declining revenues. That's all really critical for our businesses. And one thing that I've seen come up a lot is that uh, people have in construction companies, you've got bonding requirements, and the parents have all this bonding capacity because they've been working for 30 or 40 years, and they've built up a whole bunch of financial health, and they try and transition to the kids. Well, the kids don't have any bonding capacity, or this also happens when you try and transfer a construction company to employees, and they have no bonding capacity either. So there are some wild card factors that could come up that might prevent you from transferring it to kids. But assuming that you feel like it's a viable option and your son or daughter is appropriate for this, and you think you've got a mentorship period that you can do, um, and the business is viable to do this. So let's get into the meat of this and talk about what the options are for making the transfer. And uh, basically, you've got really two, and it's just you're going to give it to them or you're going to sell it to them, right? Now, one way or another, it's going to be a gift or it's going to be a sale. Somehow or other, your son or daughter is going to get that business, um, and or let's just say part of the business. And so let's call that a gradual transition or a hybrid approach for your ownership transition options. So first of all, let's talk about gifting. From an estate perspective, there uh, there really isn't a huge downside in transferring and gifting the business to the kids, at least not over the last few years, and certainly what we see coming up with the current administration, because we currently have or in 2024 we had a 13.61 million per spouse estate tax exemption. And that's a unified amount of assets that can be in an individual's estate uh, when you pass away. So there there's a lot of estate that can be gifted between a husband and wife, with 27.2 million there. And they just proposed on May 9th, Congress just proposed, or I think the Ways and Means Committee proposed just a few days ago, 15 million for 2026. Because at the current law, what's going to happen in 2026 if they don't extend it, and I think everyone thinks that they will, or they may increase it, then the Tax Cut and Jobs Act would sunset back to um, previous levels, which is the 5.62 million adjusted for inflation. We think is going to be around 6.5 million per spouse. So I'm throwing around a lot of numbers there, but at the end of the day, you've got a right now you've got a fairly high exemption for transferring assets to the family, which you can use during your lifetime. And if they do what they're proposing, which is 15 million per spouse, then you'd have a grand total of 30 million between husband and wife that you could transfer during your lifetime and sort of use up that exemption. Or if you still have assets, in your estate when you pass away, then there's an exemption. And once you exceed that threshold, that exemption amount, that's when you get into estate tax and estate tax planning. So gifting is a possibility. You just got to be aware if your total, business assets are well in excess of, let's just say 20, 22, 23, 25, $30 million, then you really need to get up to speed on what estate tax is, how it works, and some of the estate tax mitigation strategies. But for most of us who have businesses and assets that are under that threshold, um, there really isn't a estate tax concern in terms of gifting it to the kids. Now, there may be a practical concern there because gifting it to them is uh, can create feelings of entitlement on their part, or perhaps feelings of you know um, disparate treatment with your other children who who didn't get that gift. So there's some practical aspects. So anyway, gifting is a possibility. If we did gift, right, it would be if you're a corporation, then you're gifting shares of stock. If you're an LLC, you're gifting membership interests, and that's the practical way to make that happen. But let's move on to option two is a sale. Um, Sort of that I think the good thing about a sale is that you avoid some of those practical problems of that they just got a gift, or that the disparate treatment with the other kids. um, you also give them the ability to have a tax basis, right? When they bought the business, now they've got a basis in the business that allows them to then at some point sell and have some basis to offset capital gains tax. Um, how do you sell to your kids? Well, promissory note, installment sale, spread the payments over a period of time, and that can create a nice income stream for the parents in retirement. Um, and the upside is let's just say we did an outright sale to the kids. The cool thing there is that we're done. As parents, we're out. We don't have to mess with it anymore. Um, Let the kids run the business and just pay us out over a series of years. I think with the other children, I think that's perceived as a more fair alternative when their siblings bought the business and paid for it. Um, on the downside, it puts you as the parent and the business owner in the role of being a bank, and you're not a bank unless you own a bank, and maybe then you are. But if you're not a professional lender by trade, then maybe retirement is not the place to dabble in being a bank and taking on that risk. Um, Perhaps consider having the kids, finance portion of it themselves so that you can get cashed out as to part of it and then maybe carry back a second or something. So the thing that I don't like about a sale to family is just I hate it when my business owner clients turn in to the bank of the business as opposed to the operator of the business. that's always a little bit concerning to me because it's probably the worst possible time to take on that risk. Uh, but sometimes there really aren't other alternatives when the kids are not, you know, able to uh, either go for third party financing or finance it, themselves. So in a sales situation, you also don't eat up your estate tax exemption like we were talking about with a gift. So that's sort of option two. Um, Option three is a gradual transition or maybe a hybrid approach. This is the one I tend to like the most. I mean, obviously it's individualized, but um, a hybrid approach is kind of cool in the sense that it gives us a period of time where we can let them gain ownership, become an owner, and then sort of prove themselves as an owner, right? So we can keep them around, we can incentivize them and say, "Hey, I got a plan for you. I'd love for you to take over this thing, but I'm not going to just hand it to you. You need to earn it, and we're going to start small, and we're gonna have you, maybe you buy some of the shares, and maybe you gift some of the shares or bonus them based on performance, right?" Uh, and the great thing about that is it gives you sort of a phased transfer of ownership, and it allows for that mentorship period I was talking about in the um, first sort of bullet points I was hitting. And I- it's I think it's a great way to take a look at uh, what your son or daughter is actually doing in the business, and also gives them a new status as a shareholder or an owner, and it gives them a little bit of street cred with the employees, and it gives them access to the financials of the business, and so they're participating in higher level discussions and decision making. So if they're ready for that and you're ready for that and you go down that path, then sometimes we break it into chunks of 10% a year for 5 years, and once you get 50%, then you just buy me out the rest of the way, right? And so that I think also makes banks and lenders feel good because they've been in the business for a while. They've been gradually increasing their ownership. They've been buying you out slowly, um, and it allows us to have benchmarks, right? You can set um, some goals and say, hey, if you do these things, then I will do these things, and we'll let you earn your way in here. Um, the the practical tools of that. So let's kind of move on to structuring it legally. And um, I don't know, Macy, are you moving that risk assessment checklist with me? If you're not, make sure you're moving on down. But uh, in terms of how do you do this and the practical aspects of it, structuring the transfer legally is usually done with a purchase agreement of some kind. If you're just doing a buyout, right? It'll be a stock purchase agreement. You'd have a promissory note, maybe collateral security for the promissory note. So if it all goes bad, you could take it back. If you're doing a gift, then memorializing the gift and uh, ideally coming up with an appropriate value for the gift so that you can um, share that with the IRS. If you gift more than the annual exclusion amount, I forget what it is this year, but it's around 18,000 a year. So if you gifted more than that in 1 year, you do need to let the IRS know, and they just deduct it, from your overall estate tax exemption. Um, oh, it's showing my screen, I guess. Oh, there we go. Sorry, guys. I'm here on number three. Um, so you will have to let the IRS know what you did gift. It was if it was over the 18,000, which I think is roughly the exclusion for below which you don't even have to tell the IRS about it. You can just gift. So, um, but if you're going to gift, you want to memorialize it, document it, and if you go over the exclusion, you've got to file a 709 gift tax return and let the IRS know. You won't necessarily have to pay tax on that because they'll just deduct it from your overall exemption when you pass away later on, and whatever the exemption is in the year that you pass away. Um, for the phase transfer, I like to do an employment agreement and a stock purchase agreement with redemption rights. Let me explain what that means. So if I'm going to hire uh, my son or daughter to run the company or to participate in running the company, and we're going to do this phase buyout or phase transfer, right? First of all, I want to know that I'm going to give them a job description, right? I'm going to formalize it. I'm going to put it in writing. I'm going to have an employment agreement that just defines those terms of their employment, and I'm going to make their ownership of shares contingent upon their employment. And in their employment agreement, it's going to say that I have the right to fire them, right? I mean, obviously, we need to do that if things go south. And if I do fire them, then there needs to be a buyback ability so that I can buy back those shares, and even ideally a formula to be able to calculate what the share value is. So I say, look, you're in this phase transfer. We're going to do, here's 10%. Here's another 10%. We're 3 years in, it's 30%, and we have an absolute impasse and a meltdown for whatever reason, right? And it's not going to work anymore. I need to have the ability to fire that son or daughter and recoup those shares. Now they own those shares, and I'll have a redemption right to claw them back and say, look, I'm buying them back, so I own them all again, and I can do what I want. But I do owe you some money for those shares, and we want to be able to figure out what that formula is. The legal tools for that are going to be typically an employment agreement and a stock purchase agreement. Or, sometimes you can encompass that in a buy sell agreement as well. And sort of, defining those terms. It's also important to make sure that as your son or daughter becomes an owner, right, the whole relationship changes. Uh, now they have access to the financials. They have shareholder rights. They can they can see everything, and they have a vote as a shareholder. So understanding, shareholders elect the board of directors, right? And so having clarity in the bylaws and what their rights are, and if you're not sure how that's set up because you've been sort of the sole owner for a long time, you want to get some clarity about that, because sometimes bylaws are set up with seat votes for boards as opposed to percentages of ownership. So imagine if you're the only member of the board of directors, and then you give your son or daughter 10% shareholder ownership interest. They elect themselves to the board of directors, and now you've got two votes, yours and theirs, and there's no tiebreaker provision, and now we're in a deadlock if we disagree about something. I'm sure most of us would not like to be in that situation. So uh, sidebar, right? Make sure that if you're going to start doing a phased ownership transfer, that you have clarity about decision making, both at the board level and day-to-day operations, and who's going to do what, who's going to be the CEO, and who's going to do other things. And then sort of have a back end plan for the ultimate buyout. Like, are you going to let them get to sort of 51%, and then they have to buy you out the rest of the way, or what's the end game from that? And all that can be encompassed usually in a couple of different tools, like a stock purchase agreement, or a membership purchase agreement if it's an LLC. Same concept. A buy sell agreement, which has the restrictions on transfer of shares, and an employment agreement, which defines the terms of their employment. So those are sort of all my tools in the toolbox for that. I would say, lastly, family harmony and communication. I mean, so people ask me a lot. They say, "Hey, Gary, when we're doing estate planning or business succession planning, you know, they said, should I give copies of all this to my kids?" And the overarching question there is, once you come up with these plans, do you talk about it with your kids, right? It's here. I'll give you the pros and cons. It's obviously a unique decision to different families. Some families have very open relationships in this regard. Some don't. I tend to lean towards the openness side. However, um, be, on the positive side, when you share with your family about what your plan is, it does prevent conflict, because they know it came from you and it wasn't, brother or sister taking advantage later on when you were incapacitated or passed away. So I think setting the stage that way and going, "Hey, this is really my plan. This is, my thing." That's a good thing. The downside of it is obviously it can create hard feelings when you come out with a plan. For example, you've got a kid that is a business owner and operator. You've got a kid that is not a business owner operator. They're an artist or something, completely different, and have no interest in the business and no business skills. And then you may have a kid that's off the rails and, maybe they're struggling with substance abuse. How do we deal with that, right? Well, I would say that those things, like, fair is not necessarily equal. Um, and the challenge in business succession planning is that question, really. Um, how do you deal with kids who are functioning in the business when most of your estate wealth is tied up in the ownership of the business and the assets there? Um, you know, the easiest way I think is to look at things like, potentially having uh, the owner, the business operator kid, if they buy in to part or all of the business, then and you carry some financing or you receive some cash in exchange for that they got with third party financing, that cash as an asset or that promissory note as an asset can be titled and owned by your trust and payable out to the other siblings, so that there is a fairness component there. That's one alternative. Another alternative is to have a completely separate funding mechanism for kids that don't work in the business, like IRAs, life insurance, beneficiary accounts. Uh, you know, totally different strategy, right? You just kind of go, okay, hey, this kid's getting, the business over here. We're giving that much. They're buying this much, and so we're going to give a roughly equivalent portion in life insurance, IRAs, or other assets to this kid who doesn't have anything to do with the business. The last thing we want, guys, is to set up our children as co-owners of a business to absolutely have a royal fight over everything, right? Because in most cases they would do that. There are some rare families that have legacy businesses that do amazing, but um, probably, the idea that you're going to give a third of the shares to kid A, a third of the shares to kid B, and a third of the shares to kid C is probably a horrible idea, right? I mean, I think most of us, and having done business succession planning and even being a father myself, I would never do that. Um, Now, you can, if you have a large enough business, what we've done sometimes is you can divide up the operations of the business, maybe the sales and marketing of the business, and you may be able to, craft different business units. I've seen that strategy successfully employed. If you have, another thing that we've done is you can take a family limited partnership or an LLC, and you can, for example, with a farming or an agriculture family, we can fund the the land that the farming family owns into an LLC, or family partnership, and have that LLC owned by the parents' trust. And you can start, moving that ownership over even during your life for estate tax advantages. But ultimately, you can have sort of the non-business owner kids get the benefit of the land income, right, in the form of lease payments from a separate operating entity, which runs the farming side of things. So that's a possibility as well. Um, so lots of different strategies there, things to think about. But I'll sort of wrap up to say that, um, on the bright side of talking about it is you're gonna get the message across. The downside of talking about it is in the future, if you change your plan, they are going to expect what you told them already. And so whenever you share any kind of estate planning or business succession planning with your kids, if the circumstances in the future change, like let's say your son or daughter marries someone and you feel like that spouse is a bad influence or something, and you go in and you change your estate plan. Remember, you've now told them details about how they're expecting things to go. And so now you're in a very awkward position of either going back to them and saying, I changed my mind because I don't like your spouse. This makes Christmas really fun, right? You probably don't want to say that. And so if you don't want to be in an awkward situation in the future about changes to your plan, then I like to be kind of broadly vague and just say, I got a plan. Here's roughly what it is. I may change it in the future, but this is what it is for now. Um, and be pretty high level with it. That way you don't kind of get in a jam. Um, I got to wrap up because we're just about out of time here. But uh, obviously, if even if you go down this path with a child, son or daughter, business owner, operator, make sure you have a backup. They're really, their life may change too. They might become incapacitated. They might pass away in a horrible tragedy. You don't really know, and so you should really have a backup kind of third party management or even a outright sale of the business in the event that both you and them become incapacitated or pass away, right? So just a heads up. I mean, don't ignore that and just assume that it's going to work with your son or daughter. And we'll talk about that a little bit on our next one. I do if I think I can do Q&A here. Maybe Macy can help me. Let me see if there's comments. Macy's got comments. If anyone has questions, I think you can share it in the chat, and I'm happy to try and do that really quickly here. I haven't done that before, but feel free to drop one in there. I'll see if I can go on to LinkedIn. If you haven't gotten the risk assessment checklist that I'm looking at here, make sure you email Macy or post in the chat there. We're happy to share the link with you so that you can go through that for your own business, take a look at it. And as always, I mean, I'm happy to do a welcome call with you, which is a free get to know each other 15, 20 minutes to talk about your situation and see if there's something that we can do to help you. So there our link there is at lawvex.com, and you can always contact Macy or reach out to us with the number on the risk assessment checklist. So, all right, let me I'm going to stop sharing that, and then let me just go to the chat, and I think, yeah, I don't see any. Macy, do you have any in the chat? I don't think you do. So I think we're good. Thanks for joining us today. Appreciate you guys checking it out. And I hope that was interesting for you and helpful. Lots to talk about in terms of transferring the business to your family, right? Some pretty hot topics with your kids, some of them who are business owners and operators, some of them who are not. But yeah, thanks for coming along on the journey with me and exploring this as I sort of do my own succession planning. And I hope you take some time to join us next time. On episode 5, we're going to talk about how to set up the business to sell on the open market or private sale. There are some great things. Yeah, you're welcome. I see that in the chat, Ruben. You're welcome. Appreciate you joining us. And I'm getting some decent views. I got 166 views on the last one and about 116 on the first one. So do me a favor, if you know somebody who this might be interesting or helpful for, just click the like. Obviously, what do they say? And all the streamers say, smash like, and share it with all your friends. So please, do us the courtesy of doing that if there's somebody out there that might benefit from what we're chatting about here. So anyway, thanks guys, and watch my profile. We'll be doing the countdown for the next one. We usually do these on Tuesdays or Wednesdays at noon. Thanks guys. Bye.